Getting tired of tempestuous, egocentric superstars? You're about to get a break. In this lecture, I'm turning first to our third high Renaissance superstar, Raphael Sanzio da Urbino. He was, according to numerous testimonies by contemporaries, a genuinely nice guy. Although he died young at age 37, Raphael left a large body of works. The School of Athens is probably his most famous painting, and it's our required work. But you know the drill by now. I want you to see more of his work. I thought you'd be especially interested in the self-portrait sketch he drew when he was just 14. Raphael was born and raised in Urbino under the reign of its warrior humanist duke, pictured above in a famous double portrait by an early Renaissance master, one of my favorites whom we're, alas, otherwise passing over. His father was a court painter who apprenticed him to Perugino. Raphael's early works, as you can see, were heavily influenced by Perugino, whose painting of Christ handing the keys to St. Peter, you've seen it before, is on the left. I've cropped it to make the comparison easier. The similarities between the two paintings are pretty obvious, but what big difference do you notice? Raphael's painting has stronger colors and more distinct faces because he was painting in oil. Light, bright colors tended to work better with fresco, while one of the many advantages of oil was that layers of paint and glazes permitted deeper tones. Remember that the Italians were coming to know the great oil paintings of the Northern Renaissance, and especially Jan van Eyck's. In his early 20s, Raphael left Urbino for Florence, and this painting dates from that period. Among his many admirable character traits was that Raphael admired and happily borrowed from other great artists. So which artist is Raphael channeling here? If you guessed Leonardo da Vinci, you're right. Notice the pyramidal composition and the setting of the Madonna in a beautiful landscape without halos or thrones. We also see chiaroscuro and even a hint of sfumato in the slightly blurred boundaries. But Raphael's Madonnas, and he painted a lot of them, are sweeter and a little less mysterious than Leonardo's, and his setting is the gentler, less dramatic, and less fantastical landscape of his native Umbria. Here's a later Madonna painted toward the end of Raphael's sadly short life, when the painter had moved to Rome and gained Pope Julius II sponsorship. The kneeling saint, the early Christian Saint Sixtus, has the face of Julius II. Note the mystical setting and the greater three-dimensional bulk of the figures. But once again, Raphael employs the highly stable triangular or pyramidal composition. The little angels at the bottom of that painting have become famous images, but again, they show Raphael's remarkable talent for capturing individual expression. And here are two Raphael portraits. The portrait on the left is Castiglione, the author of a famous book, The Courtier, which described the ideal Renaissance gentleman. I love the piercing eyes and the exquisitely rendered texture of the cloth. Raphael was paying attention to what painters were up to in Flanders. I included the portrait of a woman because Raphael, unlike our previous two superstars, preferred women to men in his personal life, and I think he paints women with great sensitivity and affection. And here it is, finally, our required Raphael work. The School of Athens. Raphael moved to Rome in 1508, and he would spend the last 12 years of his life there working for two popes, Julius II and his successor, Leo X, who was, by the way, the second son of Lorenzo de' Medici. Julius II immediately commissioned Raphael to produce frescoes for what was intended to become the Pope's private rooms at the Vatican Palace. This fresco was painted for the Sala della Signatura, now the room where the Pope signs official papal documents. But when Raphael was painting this room, was actually Julius II's private library, and the paintings reflect his wide intellectual interests, as well as his belief that classical and Christian ideas could and should be reconciled. So you read an excellent textbook discussion of the School of Athens, and I hope watched a Khan Academy video on the work. But one danger of this laser-like focus on the philosophy fresco is it's easy to forget that it was just one of 4 paintings in Pope Julius's private library. He also commissioned frescoes portraying poetry, jurisprudence, that's law, and theology. Binding these together was the theme of wisdom, which Pope Julius saw as emanating from all of these sources. I thought that this video clip from a full-length documentary about Raphael presents an interesting analysis of the School of Athens. It also provides somewhat different information than the textbook or the Khan Academy video. So this is going to be the main discussion of this work today. Don't tune out. I'll just quickly recap a few points. One of the many reasons why art historians love this painting is that they get to play spot the famous guy. Here are a few famous contemporaries of Raphael masquerading as Greek sages. As your textbook notes, Plato is pointing to the heavens, reflecting his more abstract concerns, while Aristotle, more grounded in the world, is pointing to the earth. The red of Plato's tunic symbolizes fire or spirit, which rises up. The brown symbolizes the earth. Here, and what turns out to be a very crowded slide, we get a sense of the entire room and again the range of the Pope's intellectual interest. And now that we've sped through Raphael, we are going to really speed through Venice and Titian. So Venice is different from the rest of Italy. During the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, its fortunes were built on maritime trade with the East, and Venice's ties to Byzantium were stronger than anywhere else in Italy. Venetians of the upper class did not attend humanist academies. They were sent to sea as boys. As a result, the interests of the ruling class tended to be less intellectual, more focused on nature, and perhaps more sensual as well. But above all, Venice was and is a city bathed in light. Light bouncing off its canals, light reflecting from the mosaics that decorate its Byzantine-style churches, including St. Mark's, and light shining through its most famous product, glass. No, this is not a Renaissance painting. It's an Impressionist painting of Venice by Monet, but it captures Venice's extraordinary light. Okay, I couldn't resist another Monet, this time a sunset. Let's turn to today's second video for a discussion of Venice and its art. I'm going to quickly show a few paintings by famous Venetian artists, starting with Bellini. Pay attention to how these painters use color and light. And let me just note that the ever-grumpy Michelangelo accused Venetian painters of paying too little attention to drawing. Sure, they were masters of color, but what about line, shape? And see if you agree with Michelangelo's criticism. So here we can compare Bellini's painting with Raphael's Marriage of the Virgin. They're both oil paintings, and both artists use color masterfully. But Bellini, typical of Venetian painters, used softer, layered colors. Raphael's oil painting still in many ways resembles tempera with its sharp, bright colors. Like Van Eyck and Leonardo, the Venetians explored the potential of oil paint for producing more subtle gradations of color. Notice, too, the much more powerful role played by light in the Bellini painting. The two saints in the foreground, St. Peter and St. Jerome, are cast into shadow. The Virgin and Child are bathed in a light that seems actually to be emanating from a real source. We will see much more of this when we get to Baroque art. With this painting by Giorgione, we again see the subtle gradations of subdued colors and the play of light and shadow. But this painting also represents another important aspect of Venetian art. I've already said that the Venetians were less focused on the intellect and more focused on the senses. Nature plays a more central role in many Venetian paintings, what is here called a pastoral mood. There's a romantic, sentimental feel to this work that, to my mind, recalls Botticelli, but with softer lines and colors. By the way, this painting's juxtaposition of nude females and clothed men would be copied by many later artists, so stay tuned. Titian is the last of our superstars, but since I'm running out of time, he is not going to get the attention he deserves. He painted this self-portrait when he was about 70 years old. He had a long, rich career, and there are a lot of Titians out there for you to see. I actually like him best as a portrait painter, but we don't have a portrait among our required works. Titian began his artistic career apprenticed to a mosaicist, which may contribute to his interest in reflective light. But he then went to work for Bellini. Eventually, he became the most sought-after painter in Europe, working for kings, emperors, and, of course, popes. This masterwork was actually Titian's first major composition. The brilliant light shows Titian's mosaic past and also Venetian's debt to Byzantine art. But the combination of stability and movement is characteristic of the High Renaissance, especially Michelangelo. Again, you see strong colors and vibrant light of Venetian painting, combined with Titian's superb skills as a portraitist. To my mind, this is one of the most beautiful and human Marys in Italian art. Note, too, the foreshortening of God the Father. Titian has learned from his fellow Italian masters. Titian also loved to paint pastoral scenes and mythological scenes. This painting combines the two. It's based on a Greek myth. Jupiter falls in love with the princess Europa. He takes the form of a beautiful white bull, persuades the girl to climb upon his back, and as soon as she does, the bull makes for the sea and takes her off to Crete where, well, you can figure out the rest. The result was King Minos and the birth of European civilization. The continent was named after this princess. I decided to include this painting in my lecture after I found this juxtaposition on the internet. On the right, we see a close-up of the section of Europa's clothing that's marked out by the rectangle in the full painting on the left. This gives us an opportunity, or part of the painting, this gives us an opportunity to observe Titian's brushstrokes. It's harder to identify brushstrokes in, say, a painting by Van Eyck. They are small, meticulous, well-blended, and largely hidden. The term art critics use for this sort of brushstroke is tight. Titian employed looser brushstrokes, often large swaths of paint that can be readily identified. Again, the term art critics use for this is loose brushstrokes, and we'll see a lot more of this in our next unit. Okay, on to our required work. I borrowed this slide, and when I tried to make it more readable, I just got it messed up, so let's live with it. As the diagrams indicate, the painting has an interesting, oops, is this going to build? Ah, there we go. It has an interesting composition, an inverted pyramid with diagonals that are connected both by line and color. Notice how the two smaller figures on the right balance the reclining nude, as do the red of her cushion and her serving woman's skirt. Remember, too, that red and green are complementary colors that draw the eye. We don't actually know that the Venus of Urbino was Venus. The title was added later, but it's interesting to compare these two paintings because they say something about the ideal of beauty in Renaissance Italy. Note that both women have small, firm breasts and swelling stomachs, and that, unlike Michelangelo's women, they don't seem to have much muscle tone. The Italians also admired blondes, even though most Italian women had dark hair. But if this is a Venus, Titian has taken a huge leap by putting her in a domestic setting, filled with details about an upper-class Venetian room. In part, this shows the influence of the northern painters, whose work Titian knew well. Titian's paintings of naked women greatly influenced later artists. Stay tuned for Rubens. The painting on the bottom right, made 400 years later, was a direct homage to Titian's work and will be one of our required works in another month or so. So, I'd like to close with one last, rather long video segment that talks about both works. I was very intrigued by this art critic's discussion of how art historians' view of Titian's work has changed with the times. This is very relevant to the current College Board preoccupation. So, I hope you have time. Warning, the really important part comes at the end and is not every art historian's view of this painting. But it's an interesting theory and a reminder that there are a lot of theories out there. I figured this frees up a little to come up with our own.